Uh, Mr. President, to be honest, I was almost impressed by the sponsorship speech. Almost because it sounded like an opening statement for the Council for the Defense of President Duterte. At any rate, the bottom line of the committee report is wala raw ebidensya. Ngayon, ito yung malaking problema because the whole world naaalarma na sa nangyayari sa ating bansa, pero dito sa komite na sana siya ang instrumento na maglabas ng katotohanan ay naudlot dahil abruptly hininto ang proceedings. Sabi wala raw ebidensya. Hindi walang ebidensya. Kung hindi, maaring hindi ka nag-imbestiga. So yun ang aking pananaw dito. Not only because merong 9 CHR witnesses na hindi man lang naisalang. Yung 2 CHR witnesses na maliwanag na sinasabi yung participation ng state actors. Maliwanag din na nung nagsimula ng committee hearing, 3,000 pa lang yung namatay. Pero ngayong nag-sponsorship speech siya ay 6,000 na ang namatay. So, ano ito? Coincidence? O may pestilence na dumaan sa ating bansa? Kaso ito open sources lang. You don't even need to dig deeper. Open sources would show that you have video recordings of admissions to include the campaign promise and actual policy pronouncements of President Duterte to kill Filipinos in this drug war. That's one. Two, ito ay ginagawa ng state actors, particularly the Philippine National Police. Sinasabi na nanlaban, quote-unquote, kasi ito na yata yung pinakamaraming nanlaban sa period ng kasaysayan ng ating law enforcement history. Na in 6 months, 3,000 yung nanlaban. Na, kumaga, you have to be monumentally stupid na manlabang ka pa rin, na alam mong pinapatay at wala talagang nakakalusot. Sabi ng Reuters, 97% kill rate. Pangatlo, meron pang video nung Cavite police na yung isang OFW ay na checkpoint ng police, kinabukasan patay na. May balot na sa muka at nakalagay drug addict, wag tularan. So yun, captured on CCTV. It wasn't even mentioned dito. Puro general na sinasabi na dapat the EJKs must stop o ano man. Then ito yung mabigat. Based dun sa principle of command responsibility or based on the definition ng crimes against humanity, yung lack of any policy to stop and prevent the EJKs. Yun ang mga nagpapatunay na ito ay state-sponsored. Dahil pinagmamalaki ni President Duterte na man of action siya. Kung gusto niya, sabi nga niya, mahilig siya yung stop it, S-T-O-P, stop it. Di ba? As if the world will actually stop, pag sinabi niya yun. Pero wala kayong maririnig na sinabi niyang stop EJKs. Di ba? Kasi ganito yan. Sinabi ko yan doon sa committee hearing kay General De La Rosa. Coming from the uniformed services, rigidly hierarchical ang organization. Pag may nagbigay ng command, hinto mo ito, hinto yan almost immediately. Alam yan na ating kasama na ni Senator Lacson. So, sinabi ko, bakit hindi binibigay yung order na yon? Kahit tignan nyo sa transcript, ay, sabi ko, binigay mo na ba yung order na yon? Hindi daw. Bakit? Kasi precisely hindi yun yung policy. Ang policy ay yung sinasabi mismo ng presidente. Hindi to hyperbole o nagpapatawa, hindi. Kasi 6,000 na yung nangangamatay. And this is the sad part. Karamihan doon, petty drug pushers, users, na hindi mo nga alam, criminal ba ito mga ito o hindi. Then, ito yung mabigat, yung mga innocent bystanders. And worse, yung mga identified drug lords, like yung kanyang kumparing si Peter Lim, na nakita do sa picture in so many occasions, a few at least, talagang they know each other. Malayang malaya ito si Mr. Peter Lim. Di ba? So, may kita mo ngayon dito yung hypocrisy of this war on drugs. So, itong sinasabi rin kanina na meron daw impunity na nangyayari kasi marami daw riding in tandem, maraming vigilante. Akala ko ba safer na tayo dito? 6 months na nakaupo itong presidente na ito. Sabi ng isang kasama natin, malapit na raw tayo maging Singapore. Hindi ko na nga nakikita lately, baka tinamanan ng kidlat because of that statement. Nakakakilabot para na raw tayong Singapore, safer na raw tayo, and yet, dito sa, was this, itong findings na ito na hindi mo alam ano ba talaga, meron o wala. Sinasabi, may impunity ng riding in tandem. Meron bang nag-imbestiga? Meron dun sa mga hearings dito, hiningi yan palagi ano yung reports, sino yung mga salarin dito sa mga namamatay na to. Walang ibinibigay. So, ibig sabihin, ganun ang ka-impotent ang pulisya natin. Hindi naman siguro papayag si General De La Rosa. So, hindi kaya, dahil precisely yun yung policy, again, which makes it state-sponsored, because yun yung sinasabi mismo ng presidente. Then, meron tayong insidente, yung sa Mindoro. Yung sa Mindoro, merong nahuli na riding in tandem na mga dalawang opisyal ng pulis. Nakakapatay lang nila ng isang tao. State actors again. Sino may attempt ba man lang na ipatawag ito? By the way, nag-file ako ng resolution in this regard. Ipatawag itong mga ito para malaman kung bakit nila ginagawa yun. Di ba? Hindi pinatawag kasi precisely ayaw mag-imbestiga. And, yun na nga, no? Itong IAS, yung Internal Affairs Service, na papakinggan ko yung sponsor, palaging hinihingi dun sa Internal Affairs Service yung results ng mga investigation ng mga sinabing nanlaban. Kasi moto proprio, dapat may investigation pagka pumutok ng barel. Hanggang ngayon, wala. Wala ban lang na sasabing ito, mga dinismiss sa serbisyo, finailan ng murder, etc., etc. Wala. Bakit? Again, precisely because it is the policy to kill. Ito nga, itong mga sinasabi nilang or that makes it state-sponsored, itong EJKs. So, ayan yon sa first part. Now, pupunta tayo dito sa sinabi ng sponsor na nagkaroon daw ako ng bad behavior. Ang sinight niya rito yung dahil pinaalis ko raw si Mr. Matubato. Well, just for the record, and the transcripts actually would bear me out, nung pumunta ako dyan sa hearing na yan, I explained, I manifested the reason why I made that judgment call. Sinabi ko, alas 5 ng umaga, ando dun si Edgar Matubato sa holding room, alas 8:30 na ng gabi, my security officer recommended na siya ay ibiyahe na at delikadong bumiyahe ng late. Ako, tinitignan ko sa proceedings, may 16 na pulis na nakasalang. Alas 8:30 na ng gabi. Anyway, merong scheduled hearing ng October 4, 10 a.m. So sabi ko, pwede siyang paalisin. Kung ano man itatanong nila, edi isa lang nila ng alas 10 na umaga. Pero, apparently, hindi yan yung script. On the hearing before that hearing on October 3, nagkaroon ng manifestation dun sa committee na to prove na talagang or to test the credibility of Mr. Matubato, ay siya yung unang isasalang daw para ma-identify niya yung 16 na pulis. Kasi they were so sure na ito daw si Matubato ay parang isang tambay lang sa kanto na pinulot. So, siguro iniisip nila, this guy can't possibly point to the right person. Di ba? So, kaya confident sila. But, lo and behold, nung nakausap nila, yung 16 na policemen, umamin na kilala pala si Mr. Matubato. So therefore, they risk showing to the public and bolstering the credibility of Edgar Matubato by letting him point to the different policemen correctly. So ngayon, anong ginawa? Hindi siya isinalang kaagad. And I manifested. Teka muna. Bakit nung last time, ang pinag-usapan, siya yung mauuna, pero nagbago na ihip ng hangin. Precisely kasi maalam nila na ma-identify ni Edgar Matubato yung 16 at masisira yung script. So ngayon, ang sinabi niya sa kanyang sponsorship speech, sana man lang nagbigay ako ng kortesiya na pinaalam sa kanya. Kortesiya pala eh. Bakit mo sasabihing bad behavior? Kortesiya. And I explained it dun sa committee in open hearing, and I explained it to you privately. And you didn't raise hell after that. None of the other senators protested or rejected my manifestation. So, ano ito ngayon? Di ba? This is just to put me in a bad light, Mr. President. So, yan yung sinabi. Tapos, sinasabi na ako daw pumunta doon sa kanyang opisina at nag-apologize. Well, let me state for the record, Mr. President, hindi ako nag-apologize. Sinabi ko, pasensyahan tayo. Don't lie, Senator Gordon, because yan ay bad behavior. Sabi ko, pasensyahan tayo at very passionate tayo. So, gano'n na lang yon. And akala ko gentleman yung kausap ko. At we even shook hands and
Excuse me, Mr.
parted
Chairman.
Amicably. I'm not yet finished.
Mr. Chairman, is the gentleman delivering a privileged speech, or is this a matter of interpretation, or is
well,
this
you
laying
just
the
have to-
predicate for a question? Because he has multiplicity
I'm
of
laying the
questions.
predicate for multiple questions, Mr.
Just a
President.
point of order, Mr.
I still have the floor, Mr. President.
Just a point of
still have
order,
the
Mr.
floor.
President, if he knows the rules. An
still have the
interpretation
floor.
is you ask questions. And
Session is suspended for 1 minute. Majority Leader,
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
session is resumed.
Mr. President, I'll just finish this point, then I will continue the next point after yielding the floor again to the sponsor. Anyway, Mr. President, do sa hearing na yon, in fact, I was just being generous and kind sa kanya dahil napahiya siya eh. He was asserting na may material concealment, pero I read to him yung transcript na si Mr. Matobato mismo, siya ang kausap, sinasabi sa kanya yung kidnapping case because Matobato wanted to prove na totoo ito si Sally Macdum. To the point, sabi niya, totoo yan kasi finailan niya ako ng case no 2002. So, nung napahiya na, suddenly, naghanap-hanap na ng ibang lusot. Akala ko tapos na eh. Tapos ngayon, babalik ta rin pa ngayon. Sabi ko, hindi naman pwede yan. Kasi we can review the video kung ano yung sinasabi mo nun. At ano yung sinusulat mo dyan. Now, just one last point about the DDS. Dito sa DDS, we were trying to establish a pattern of behavior. Kaya namin nilabas ito si Mr. Matobato. In fact, inadmit na ito ni Mr. Duterte sa interviews na siya, totoo, may DDS, totoo, pumatay na siya ng tao. He admitted so many things. Kumaga, ano ba to? His words do not count? So anyway, aside from his admission, ito ngayon si Matobato. Ito yung background ng tao. Si HDF, sabi, CAFGO, sinabi niya, si HDF siya when corrected. He wanted to say yung CAFGO, kasi yun yung term na ginagamit ngayon, pero si HDF siya when he entered. Itong si HDF, wala kang makikitang records nito kasi localized ang recruitment nung panahon nung martial law. Si HDF siya. And in fact, kinonfirm na ito nung dalawang pulis na testigo nila. At least two of the 16 policemen said and confirmed na CAFGO ang pagkakilala nila kay Mr. Matobato at meron siyang M14 at may granada. Naka-fatigue siya dun sa kanilang opisina. So, that makes you wonder. Nandoon siya nakapagpresenta ng dokumento, nandoon siya sa City Mayor's Office from 1988 to 2013. Anong ginagawa niya doon? Nataga-timpla siya ng kape? Maari. Or striker siya? Maari. Pero may problema eh. Meron siyang lisensya ng baril eh. And yung baril, galing doon sa kanyang handler, si Las Cañas, kompleto ito ng dokumento. Tapos meron siyang appointment orders sa Heinous Crime Investigation Division. Ito grade 1 lang siya, he admits that, pero doon siya naka-assign. Kompleto again ng dokumento. So, it didn't merit the committee report of the sponsor, pero it's all on record. Plus, meron siyang 2002 kidnapping case na inassert niya, totoong may kidnapping case doon mismo sa Davao City, Finailan. So kung may kidnapping case ka, yung isang empleyado mo, kidnapping case, dapat tinanggal mo yan. Pero hindi. Precisely kasi nga, that's their job. Yun yung kanilang mandato. And similar yan dito kay Superintendent Marcos na untouchable. So yun yung pattern na makikita natin. Tama rin siya yung Laod dump site, pati yung description paano pinapatay, in-affirm niya ng Supreme Court. So, kumbaga, there was no reason not to believe him. Pero, kakasuhan siya ng perjury on one side, pero pakakasuhan din ng murder on the other kasi pinaniwalaan yung admission kay Matobato, ay kay Sally Macdum. So, twisted yung logic dito, Mr. President. You cannot admit or believe portions of the testimony and dump the others at the same time. So, Then si Las Cañas and the 16 policemen admit to working with him dun sa heinous crime investigation unit. They cannot even explain bakit siya nandoon. Di ba? So, kung itinuloy lang ni Senator Gordon yung hearing niya na October 4 and October 5, then we would have grilled yung 16 policemen na yon at makikita ng taong bayan kung sino yung nagsasabi ng totoo at hindi. At ngayon, just to inform the body, ito pong si Edgar Matubato ay kinasuhan after nitong mga hearings, appearance niya rito, kinasuhan siya ng dalawa, no? Isang frustrated murder at isang kidnapping and murder. So, kung ito taga-timpla lang ng kape, bakit hinaharas ito ng administrasyon? Bakit ini-issuehan ng warrants of arrest? At bakit interesado silang iligpit si Mr. Edgar Matubato? So, ito, Mr. President, hindi man lang nabigyan ng puwang dun sa committee report. So, yun siguro ang magandang itanong kay Senator Gordon.
Is the gentleman done, Mr. President?
Yeah, he raised a question.
What is the question? Because there were many points, many spins being...
Well, precisely, Mr. President, maraming butas. So, yung mga butas na yon, nilabas ko, I want him to explain. Yung paano niya ipapaliwanag, paano niya i-reconcile yung mga inconsistencies na yun and contradictions, Mr. President.
The chair stands by its committee report, Mr. President, to signed by 11 people. Some reserved, some said they will dissent in part, and some they say they will agree in part. We're not perfect, but nonetheless we stand by it, and except for the fact that we don't spin yarns on the matter of some of the questions raised here. The fact that the Ombudsman itself, on January 21, 2016, before President Duterte took over, said that there was no evidence or nothing to prove that the Davao Death Squad existed, and that they dismissed the case filed at that time. So I didn't even know about it until now. According to a letter sent to CHR by the Office of the Ombudsman in January 2016, and I quote, a disposition approved by the overall Deputy Ombudsman, Melchor Arthur H. Calandang, showed that no evidence was gathered to support the killings attributed or attributable to the DDS. Therefore, the investigation was closed and terminated. So, Mr. President, you have a frontline office of the government like the Ombudsman, frontline office like the CHR, and the Department of Justice, and the frontline office called the National Bureau of Investigation. And they had all these witnesses when they were at CHR, DDS. I know that we're good in the Senate, but we're not that good because we don't have the legs to make all these investigations. And we can only go by the framework of the resolution filed by Senators De Lima and the distinguished gentleman from Bicol. And therefore, that's what we addressed, that there was no evidence sufficient to form a belief, no evidence presented that there was indeed a Davao Death Squad. There's no evidence sufficient to form a belief that they were state-sponsored. And you heard me say that earlier, Mr. President, that if there should be evidence to show that in fact you can present, that you can connect it, then fine. But I cannot be held to task on something that we accepted in the committee. Sure, you know, for example, much is said about Mindoro, about those two policemen. They were captured, Mr. President, and it was Senator Lacson and myself that exposed this at the time. And the fact that they were captured and we got agreement from the, don't need agreement, we told the police chief at that time and General Bato de la Rosa that they should investigate this. In the same manner that in Cavite, we also told them that they would investigate. We are not a police investigation, Mr. President. Unless you want to change the charter of the Committee on Justice, in which case we can conduct that investigation as policemen. There are people assigned to do that job, and we're not going around it. The point is, the framework of the investigation was clear, and we did not receive any evidence. So you cannot squeeze blood from us. We already agreed, and I agree with the gentleman. There have been so many killings in this country, and in fact, the title itself speaks for itself. We must end these killings with impunity, and that is why we provided all the necessary recommendations. Now, of course, later on, evidence may be presented to show that. Then, so well and good. But right now, there was no evidence presented by those who filed the resolution to show that. Besides, Mr. President, when you talk about Mr. Matobato, you know, I know that we all try to respect one another, including the gentleman. We waited there. We conducted marathon hearings. The police were there, and they were waiting also. They came from Davao. Nobody tried to hide them. All the subpoenas that were given to them, the invitations that were given to them were, of course, by Senator De Lima to the chair, and we invited all of them. When we do not get the kind of answers that we want from them, or rather, Senator Trillanes doesn't get the answers that they want from them, he has no call to say that they're lying unless he can prove it. But the fact of the matter was, it was proven. It was Matobato who was lying. In fact, Mr. President, I have already cited that, and I will not repeat it again. On the matter of me being embarrassed, excuse me, Mr. President, I was very clear. The concealment was very clear to me, that the people, that the cases that were filed against Mr. Matobato, and I was then laboring under the, the impression that according to Matobato, Macdum was a terrorist. And that's why they killed him. My suspicion is that, and I didn't put it there, is that it was a business that did not push through, and so he was killed. Why would he now say he admits killing him, Mr. President? Why would he admit that after two sworn statements saying, first, he's not part of it. Second, he saw the killings, and finally, he said, binikti ko at pinagsasaksak. So, Your Honor, nagbabago even with that very vital matter. And by the way, Mr. President, as I said in my sponsorship, Mr. Matobato was charged by the NBI. It wasn't Macdum, because Macdum appears to be dead already. There's no corpus delicti. Upon the complaint of the wife of Macdum, the NBI investigated, and they filed the case against Mr. Matobato. And in that case, several other people, other than the policemen that were brought in, whom Mr. Matobato alleged were the perpetrators. That was the material concealment. Because otherwise, you would not have gone through all that wild goose chase. That if we had known that it was not the same policeman, why go through all the motions, Mr. President? But nonetheless, we did go through the motions. And that's not the only place where he lied, and I already stated that. So, Mr. President, there is no disrespect on my part. When I say there is material concealment, that was brought about by the fact. And I'm sure some of the members of the committee were there, including Senator Soto. Senator Lacson was really red in the face, and I've never seen Senator Lacson so upset when he found out that Mr. Matobato had left. Because after all, we were all waiting. And also, Senator Pacquiao said, terminate it. There was calls for suspension of the hearings. And I said, what did I say? I said, no, it was just an oversight on the part of Senator De Lima. I was defending Senator De Lima. Until all of a sudden, dumating si Senator Trillanes, and an immediate change of personality occurred, and right away, things went haywire. And she walked out. Mr. President, I cannot answer for the acts of my brothers or my sisters or my brethren here, but I will try to respect them as often as I can. It is far from me to say I will accuse my fellow senators here of lying. There are several witnesses who saw Senator Trillanes come to my office. Why would he go there? And Senator De Lima later on, it was because I had said I would file an ethics case. And because of that, I did not file an ethics case anymore, Mr. President. And when I was asked, I said, tapos na yan, huwag na natin pag-usapan yan. At least give me that respect. Now, if you don't want to give me that respect, I will understand. I know where you're coming from. But, Mr. President, I don't try to pick fights. And I don't try to make up yarns. He gave me a duty, I did not want it. I was tasked for it. And I did my best. If my best is not enough to the high standards that Senator Trillanes sets for himself, I'm sorry. I'm not as great as he is. That's my answer, Mr. President.
Okay. Well, Mr. President, regarding my supposed visit to his office, okay, granting without conceding totoo yung sinabi niya, in his own words, sige, tama na, tapos na yan, wag na pag-usapan yan. And then, isusulat mo rito sa committee report mo? Anong klase kang tao?
Please address the President, the Chair.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. President. I think
So,
that should be done.
yun yung ano rito eh. Yung duplicity na hindi ko maintindihan eh. And again, I was so clear, hindi ako nag-apologize, Mr. President, kasi siya nga yung mali eh, doon sa episode na yon. And again, the recordings and the transcript would bear us out. Now, going to Mr. Matubato.
May I ask,
sabi
Mr.
niya
President?
yung conflicting...
Kasi mahaba yan eh. I just asked you that point.
Well, Mr. President, just on this point, conflicting daw yung statements ni Matubato kay Sally Macdum. And yet, doon siya pinapakasuhan ng murder because the sponsor accepted the word of Mr. Matubato. So, even now, siya ay conflicted and he's contradicting his statements. And yung sinasabi niyang pinatay daw si Sally Macdum, kasi ang sabi ni Matubato, foreign na terrorist ito. Pero based on the suspicion of the sponsor, ano daw ito? This is just a land agreement na nagkabulila. So, suspicion alone. Wala siyang basis in fact whatsoever, pero siguro ganun kagaling ang ating sponsor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the remark. Magaling ako, and I'm humbled by it. I just want to say, Mr. President, that when we said that Matubato made remarks, it was Lascana who said that they both made 800,000 pesos from land deals, Mr. President. It's in the record. And at the same time, Mr. President, it was the NBI that charged them for kidnapping with murder. And it was a kidnap affair. So it was not part of whatever goblins there are, whether they're Davao Death Squad or whatever. What is clear is that these were different personalities that were concealed from us. They had the affidavit, we did not. And if it had been given, shown the affidavit, we would not have gone there. Now, Mr. President, I am accused that what kind of a man I am because I put this in the testimony. I did not even recommend ethics case, Mr. President. You know, when Senator Trillanes came to me, the following day, right after that apology, there was a headline in the newspaper that Senator Trillanes was attacking me and the committee. Mr. President, if I were to go into habit, you will recall that while we were hearing, Mr. Trillanes goes in here and starts attacking the way we were conducting the hearing. And I objected to that, as the majority floor leader will remember. So, Mr. President, I respect Senator Trillanes. I try to be as friendly to him as we can. When a senator comes to your office, you stand up, you greet him, and when he says, I'm sorry, tapos na yan, tapos na. When you wake up the next day and you see the headline, tapos na pa rin. Wala na akong inangal, hindi ko na sinagot. And then, throughout the hearings, you know, Senator De Lima would say something, Senator General would say something. Well, I am just reciting what happened, Mr. President. This is a recitation because it goes into the essential elements of this investigation. When Senator De Lima says that he brought in Matubato, Mr. President, they would have us believe that he is a very honorable witness. in fact, Mr. President, at that time, we found out that he had a pending warrant for illegal possession of firearms, for which he was arrested afterwards, Mr. President. They would have us believe that Matubato, a self-confessed killer, describing how he did it after lying twice, and saying that, admitting that he killed him by stabbing him several times, they would have us believe that Matubato is an honorable man. They would have us believe that this guy, Matubato, and hide behind the grade 1, and yet he was able to say that he was doing land deals. They would have us believe that, and Senator Lacson corrected him, that Matubato was telling the truth when he said they were killed in McDonald's, and Senator Lacson himself said, I know. He was killed in the office. So, Mr. President, forgive me, maybe I don't see something that is invisible to me, but visible to Senator Trillanes. I wish I could believe him, but I cannot. And that's the way it is. Just like Mr. Pacquiao and I, he says, why don't you agree with the death penalty? Because I don't agree with the death penalty, and let's leave it at that. I cannot change his mind, Mr. President. I cannot change the distinguished gentleman's mind. He has made up his mind. And perhaps a word of caution and a word of advice. Just because you say it doesn't mean it's the truth. Just because you allege it doesn't mean it's the truth. You have to prove it. Evidence must be proven. And here in this particular instance, Mr. President, we're all senators. And we'd like to say that today we may disagree, tomorrow we become friends again. We lawyers know that. But obviously, we cannot continually go into this, because if we do not agree, so let's say I agree with him and say, oh, may extrajudicial killing sponsored by the government, what are we going to do next? Are we going to impeach the President? Mr. President? If you have the evidence, we will impeach the President. But what I can do is, there is nothing said about the recommendations of the committee. Nothing is said in restricting the ability of IAS from extending investigations ad absurdum and ad nauseum. We're now saying 15 days. Tell us if that policeman did it in violation of the rules on self-defense, in violation of the rules of engagement. We made the proposals, Mr. President, to make sure that a special court be created, so that beyond that we can have guilt beyond reasonable doubt established. And we also said, how many of us are aware? How many times has the chief PNP ever dismissed a policeman, Mr. President? We are demanding that. In fact, in the last hearing, I told the PNP chief, you must do something about Leyte. Well, look at what happened. Finally, the Leyte chief of police, Albuera, Espirito, has been removed. Then, the Secretary of Justice disagrees with the President. And he says, no, we're going to go with it. I expressed my chagrin. I expressed I was disturbed with the President. I am with him. Perhaps you can agree with that. Nobody wants people being killed, especially me. I spent a lot of my childhood or my young adulthood going after injustice, Mr. President. But, Mr. President, when it comes to this sort of thing, we must be sure that we present ourselves in the proper demeanor, in the proper addressing of, when we make an investigation, we can only do what has been presented before us. I would have wanted it if Mr. Trillanes comes out and says, I have here a secret document that shows President Duterte ordered the killing of the following people. I have here a document that shows it's a policy of the PNP Director General to tell his policemen to kill everybody. None of that was presented. And of course, it's going to be very hard to get that. But the important thing is, take a look at the epilogue. I think it says what I feel. And hopefully what the rest of the committee feels, because they signed it in part or in dissent, in favor or in dissent. I think nobody will disagree with the epilogue. But at least, Mr. President, we did our best. And if our best is not enough, again, in accordance with the highest standards that Senator Trillanes has set in the Senate, before, during, and after, Mr. President, then I'm sorry, I cannot, I'm sorry, I'm short. I'm short of that.
Mr. President, well, just to clarify, the incident that the senator was talking about regarding after our conversation in his office, then the following day, during some media reports, I made some statements. Those interviews were done in the morning before I went to your office. But anyway, what's done is done. That visit was supposed to have resolved that issue, but apparently it did not. Then, as to the so-called McDonald's statement of Edgar Matubato, again, it's clear in the transcript that he was narrating what was told to him. He wasn't saying it as an eyewitness, but it was a narration to him. So, ano talaga?
Then,
As
Mr. Chairman, that is hearsay.
As the senator,
This cannot be
precisely,
accepted as evidence.
but it should not be used to discredit him. Now, the senator said that it's not visible to him what I'm seeing. Well, it's so clear to me, Mr. President. It's so visible because my eyes are open. Apparently, some people still have their eyes closed, despite the fact that we have 6,000 people killed already, and this committee report basically cleared the man that could have stopped it at least, or killed the man who was responsible for it. That's my beef with this committee report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. President, you've heard me time and again, and I don't have to repeat it. I don't find it enjoyable to attack the President of this country. I find it my responsibility to remind him once in a while that he's the President and that he must say things properly. I find it well within our rights as citizens of this country to say that he must always forget that children are listening, or that there is a matter that he must address, which means that he must not even give a scintilla of encouragement that people should be killed. I have no evidence to show that he is ordering them, and that's why I'm confined to that. I will not be a dog barking at caravans passing through the night. I would like to make sure that if there is an evidence that we can show, Mr. President, we will do so. Mr. President, the whole Senate and the whole country is aware of the fact that before this representation took over that committee, it was absolute bedlam. Mr. President, you saw microphone grabbing. You saw intimidating statements being made. And all of us were aghast at this sort of behavior, Mr. President. And that is why a change happened. Mr. President, we must be careful when we represent our constituents here, because we are seen as senators speaking for the people, and we come from the people. And Mr. President, when you do that sort of thing, Mr. President, the Senate acted. There were changes. But it cannot be said that we did not allow Senator De Lima and Senator Trillanes or any of the senators. In fact, my first rule was, if you are in point, go beyond your 10 minutes. Pursue your point. Because, Mr. President, in the short time that I've been in the Senate, in my first term here, I've seen the points lost because we have to abide by the civil minimums of 10 minutes, and then it's over. And the point is lost. If we cannot continue your point of attack when you're conducting cross-examination or interpellation, the point is lost. In this affair, Mr. President, we allowed Senator De Lima, wide strip. We did not stop her. We did not say your time is up. Same thing with Senator Trillanes. Unfortunately, Senator Trillanes was going in and out, and I presume that he was listening in his room, and that's giving him the benefit of the doubt, which he's entitled to, Mr. President. I don't raise it against him. But there can be no doubt that when we conducted the hearings, there was wide statement. I wish that Senator Trillanes had presented more cogent evidence, more clear evidence that what he says is happening. Again, I would advise, just because you say it doesn't make it true. You have to go through the ropes of gathering evidence. And if you cannot gather evidence, you know, your words that come out of your mouth will be used as a judge on the depth of your character.
Well, Mr. President, we would have wanted to, but the sponsor and the chairman of the Committee on Justice canceled the hearings scheduled on October 4th and the 5th. And he didn't even field or presented the 9 CHR witnesses already there. So, what is the sponsor talking about that we didn't present anything?
May I ask that, Mr. President?
Gentlemen on the floor, I think for the past over an hour, we have been debating back and forth on this issue. The chair would request the two gentlemen to go to other topics rather than because this has been sufficiently put on record. So I appeal to the gentlemen to, if there are still questions on the substance of the report, put it on record. Otherwise, maybe our other colleagues may also want to take the floor on the period of interpretation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm merely answering the questions as best as I could. And just a short answer on the matter of the CHR. The record shows that the CHR were presented right away. After 2 presentations, Mr. President, they immediately shifted to Matobato. And then we went all the way to the policemen. And then when we examined the records of the CHR, Mr. President, witnesses, it showed that there were all complaints against police actions, but no evidence that shows that there is a pattern of an order or a policy being undertaken, Mr. President. So that's how we looked at the evidence, and if that is an error, it is the privilege of the senator not to sign the committee report, and I laud him for that. He has to do things in accordance with his beliefs. And I'm not going to have an argument about that, Mr. President.
All right.
Well, Mr. President, just to give way to the other senators who would want to interpolate, this representation would be submitting a much more detailed dissenting report to the body, and I would like to reserve some time for future interpolation.
All right. So noted.
And
That would be appreciated, Mr. President.